Okay, today we're doing Shulchan Aruch and Siman Tzadites, Sif Hey involved, which is the main place where the Shulchan Aruch speaks about levatel and lechatchila, the issur to purposely be levatel something, and that the fact that once you do that, if you are levatel something, you are over on being bitul issur lechatchila, the food becomes aser. It's an issur d'Rabbanan. Almost everybody holds it. It's an issur d'Rabbanan. And today I'm going to do a little different than I might usually, and that is I'm going to speak about 17 different details about bitul issur lechatchila in 4 different groups. But for each, and most of them are things that we've spoken about at other times, so I'm going to really be brief about each one of them rather than going into more detail. And so let's get started. Okay, so our first group is what I call which foods are included in the issur of bitul issur lechatchila. So things like this. The term bitul issur lechatchila is ein mevatel issur lechatchila. So that would give an impression that what happens if it's not issur? What happens if what I'm being mevatel is right now is not yet issur? Right now it's just heter. Like for example, I'm going to put milk into water, and then I plan on using that water to cook with meat, or I put chametz into food. And I put chametz into food before Pesach, but I plan to eat it on Pesach. So some people hold that that's not issur because bitul issur lechatchila means to be levatel issur. This is not issur. This is heter at this point. But most people hold that you're not allowed to do that. Since I'm basically the issur is to engineer something, a way to get things that you're not supposed to have. Which is what I'm doing. I'm putting the milk into the water to eventually eat it with the meat. So I'm working out a way to get the issur, to get something I'm not supposed to. That's what's aser. Now, related to this is a question of whether you could dilute fish into food that you can eat with meat, like if you put anchovies into Worcestershire sauce or fish into orange juice that you can eat with meat. It's a little bit different because fish is not exactly an issur; it's a sakana, but it's a related question. Okay, one place where you can be makel, the machmir brings it, you could be makel, is if you put a tiny amount of milk into bread in a way that it's going to be batel b'shishim. So there's an issur to eat, to make bread that's milchigs or bread that's fleishigs. So that issur is only if it is nice and tam. If you put in an amount of milk or amount of meat that would be batel b'shishim, that you're allowed to do, as long as you don't have specific intention to eat it the other kind. Then you run into the bitul issur of eating milk with meat. But if from the concern of making milchig bread or fleishig bread, then you're allowed to add it, assuming that it's going to be batel b'shishim. Okay, that was our first. Next, are you allowed to add the traditional way you make cheese is you take milk and you add into it rennet, comes from the stomach, the fourth stomach of a cow called a keva. So that, let's say an animal had shechita, so it's a kosher animal, but you want to take some of that rennet and put it into milk to make cheese out of it. So is it bitul issur lechatchila to do that because you're adding milk into meat? So this is we spoke about some time ago, and what it is like this. If you add in a tiny amount of rennet, that will be batel b'shishim, so it'll be mutter b'diavad because it'll be batel b'shishim. There's no issue of maimed. It'll be batel b'shishim, but lechatchila you're not allowed to do that. That's one thing. A second thing is that if you use the stomach of the cow rather than the liquid that's in there, and the stomach gets dried out, the actual keva itself, the meat, and you dry it out, of course it was from a kosher animal, then to the point that it's not edible, then that's also mutter b'diavad. Even if it's not batel b'shishim, it's also going to be mutter b'diavad. What happens if you sit here? It's better here because I have to look at the camera. But so what happens? So neither of those are you allowed to do. But if you did them together, which is the amount of rennet that you put in was batel b'shishim, and it was from the keva, from a dried out keva, those together you're allowed to do those. Okay. Number 3, there are foods that are aser only because things that you're not allowed to eat just because of maras ayin. 2 examples are if you take milk from a human, mother's milk, and you cook that with meat, so it looks like basar b'chalav, it's not really. And there are certain blood spots that are also aser only because of maras ayin. So Aruch says, since they're not be'etzem, they're not usher. They're just because of maras ayin. So there's no bitul issur because it's not an issur. Okay, but in the Shulchan he brings lots of achronim, many prominent achronim who disagree and hold that it's bitul issur to do that as well. Okay, number 4. You missed the introduction. I'm going through quickly. I'm going to do 17 things. Literally. Oh. Okay. Okay. Usually the din is safek d'Rabbanan l'kula. Well, since bitul issur is an issur d'Rabbanan, so maybe you should be allowed to be levatel safek issur. There should be no issur bitul issur on no bitul issur on safek issur because it's only it's issur d'Rabbanan and safek d'Rabbanan l'kula. So we spoke about this, as you see on the screen, back when we learned in Sim Kuf Yudalad, and if that would be true, if it would be mutter to be mevatel safek issur because only safek d'Rabbanan l'kula, then it would be a reason why you would be allowed to take medicine, liquid medicines that have in them glycerin that might or might not be treif, so it's a safek issur, and you'd be allowed to dilute it, take a little bit of the take the medicine and be mevatel it in a way that the glycerin would be mevatel b'shishim. And then you'd be allowed to have that. So that's a possibility. I'm not saying yes or no. It had a big to do when we learned Sim Kuf Yudalad. That's one possible reason. It happens to be not related to bitul issur that the issur. Bitul is not related to safek. Bitul issur is an issur d'Rabbanan. So a second reason why it would be mutter to do what I just described to be mevatel is because bitul issur is a d'Rabbanan, and for the choila, if the person is a so to speak qualified choila, then that issur d'Rabbanan would go off also. Okay, so that would be another reason to do that, to be matter that same thing, which is to dilute the medicine in liquid or something like that. Okay, and last for this section is that bitul means that something is unimportant and it's like nullified, it's like insignificant, it has no shaychus. So there are those who hold that if something is supposed to be in the food, it's an ingredient. It didn't just fall in or come in there by mistake. It's actually supposed to be in there. Maybe then. It can't be batel, even if it doesn't meet the technical qualification of bitul issur. So we spoke about that also back in the Sim Kuf Yudalad as well. Okay, moving on to our next group, things have to do with what I call non-food issues. Okay, the first of those is like this: beria chaticha liskabed or chaticha liskabed can't be batel. We'll get to those. Mir Hashem get to those halachos one of these days. Those bitulim are only true if they're whole, okay. But if they're chopped or broken up, then it's not a beria, and it's not. And then typically it's not a chaticha liskabed either. Okay, so the machmir says that's true, but you're not allowed to purposely break them apart to make them fit for bitul. I have a beria, I'll break it apart, and now it'll be batel. So now I'll do it. It's a type of bitul to do that as well. Okay, even so, even though that's true, it may be mutter to puree broccoli. Broccoli potentially has berries in it, bugs that are in there that are berries in it. If you want to make a kugel, and the reason for that we'll have to aim because ein kavonoso levatel, which we'll get to, that's in a later section. I don't remember what number it is, but it's later. Okay, now the machmir says number 7. Machmir says in Siman Tzadihei that if you wash milchig and fleshig dishes together and there's soap or ash in the water, same idea, there's soap or ash in the water, then the dishes stay kosher because the dishes, good morning, the dishes stay kosher because any time that would go from the milchig to the fleshig or back and forth would become pogum as it passes through. Okay, that's what the machmir says in Siman Tzadihei. Okay, just what we're doing. We'll learn bitul issur. I'm briefly going through 17 things. That's what today is going to be, different than usual. So we're up to number 7. That's what we're up to. Okay. Anyhow, so the machmir says in Siman Tzadihei that if you wash these dishes together, it's no time will pass from one to the other one. Okay. So what we spoke about in the past was what happens. Can I set that up? Can I create a situation where I know that I'm going to make something to be pogum? Okay, so
dishes, fleshig dishes. The
machmir says that you're allowed.
You would not be
right. So the there has to do with not barnat and things. Right. But what happens? So what happens? I want to take something that's treif. Okay, I want to do something that's treif, and I just want to make it pogum before it gets into my food. is that also so? Tzemach Tzedek holds that it's asur because it's a type of business and the Chacham Tzvi says nah, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that because I wasn't mevatel the Issur. I didn't take something asur and put it into my food. I took something that's mutter. Okay, I changed it from Issur into heter. Well, if it's heter, then I'm allowed to eat it. So I didn't do anything wrong. Okay, and as
you want to assist them before cooking.
No, because it's still Issur in my food. Oh, you mean because if I'll say it's nepach heter, is that what you're saying?
Okay, right? The bottom have a tray.
Yeah.
So the yomo is mostly you want to you add more and then you cook it.
That's a different example because over there a bitul already happened, and now I just want to cook it also. The shaila here is can I do something to take something that was Issur and turn it into heter so that I'll be able to eat it? That's what I'm trying to. I'm trying to convert it into heter. I'm not leaving it as Issur. So maybe it's not Bitul Issur because it's not Issur. The thing, but I'm just making it into heter. Okay. Now we also spoke about. That's why there's two entries over here. We also spoke about le'inyan. What about the same idea? Also, machlik is there. Whether you can burn an insect or dry out an insect to make it mutter. Okay. Once it's dried out, it becomes mutter. So are you allowed to do that? Consciously do that, not if it happened, not if it's 12 months old or it got dried out and you sort of have it already. Could you by choice do that? So in Minchas Yaakov says that that's Bitul Issur. Okay, the same idea that I'm telling you here about pegimah. He says the same idea. It's Bitul Issur. I'm taking Issur and I'm finding a way to eat it. And the Bitul Issur says no, it wasn't levatel Issur. The Issur is gone. There isn't any Issur anymore. What's here now is heter, and they're allowed to do it. Okay, that's a machlokas there. We spoke about that in Simim Pei Dal. Yeah. Okay, I have to convert back into Hebrew. Yeah. Okay. Now the next related to things like this. There's something called we just passed Pesach. Something called kitnius shenishtana. For this assumption is that's mutter. What is kitnius shenishtana? I have something that's kitnius. Now I'll eat kitnius on Pesach. But if it becomes changed over into something different, I take sugar that came from chametz and I turn it into citric acid, so it goes from something sweet into being something sour. I made this radical change in it, so we're assuming for this discussion that kitnius shenishtana is mutter. Once it's changed over, it's not kitnius anymore, and you're allowed to eat it. Okay, so the shaila is now Bitul Issur chatchila applies even to Isurim d'Rabbanan, and even to kitnius. Okay, so the question is, what about can I make kitnius shenishtana? Can I take something that's kitnius and consciously change it over from chametz, from kitnius into citric acid? Am I allowed to do that? Okay, and if I'm allowed to do that, can I give hashgachah to someone who does that? Is that worse or whatever? Okay, so seemingly it's connected to the shaila I spoke to you in number 7. Okay, what I'm doing is if you hold the kitnius shenishtana as mutter, it's not asur that I'm being mevatel. It's not asur anymore. Now it became mutter. So I wasn't mevatel Issur. I got rid of the Issur. I made it no longer kitnius. So seemingly it's connected to the question for number 7, whether you're allowed to make kitnius shenishtana in the first place. Okay. Number 9. Okay. If you cook food in a pot which is aino ben yomo, then the food is mutter b'diavad. Okay. But you're not allowed to use such a kli. You're not allowed to lechatchila use a kli that's aino ben yomo. Okay. So you're not allowed to choose to do that. The Pri Megadim says not only are you not allowed to use a kli that's aino ben yomo, not only you're not allowed to do it lechatchila, but if you did it, then the food would be asur. He says the same thing as ein mevatel lechatchila, but ein mevatel lechatchila says you're not allowed to be mevatel Issur, and if you did it, the Chacham knas you and said the food is asur. The bitul, so to speak, doesn't work. So he says the same thing here. If you use a kli that's aino ben yomo, you're not allowed to use it lechatchila. Rega, you want to Pri Megadim since in Tzadi Tes in Sisei Das Zayin. Okay, and they say that what?
Even amazing. Said machmir Kashrus should do it. That I can machmir Moshe. That famous rule where it says mechor adamer.
Yeah,
that's true. He said that, but yeah, but even amazing. But I couldn't machmir. Sharash Moshe do tak also with the but the machmir skips part of the rashba. Moshe medayed the machmir holds tak mutter with you.
Okay, I don't remember all that. Okay. Fine, so I'll have to get all the marm comes from you later. I didn't absorb it fast enough. Okay, anyhow, that's Pri Megadim says that there's an issur. Okay. Our next group of which people it applies to. Okay, the din is if I'm a mevatel for myself, I'm not. As I said to you, you're not allowed to eat it. There's a knas. I'm not allowed to eat it. If I did it for you, then me and you both can't eat it. Okay, if I did it because I made you a soup and I dafka made the bitul issur, I can't eat it and you can't eat it either. Okay, what happens if you have a manufacturer? Okay, a company they're making cookies. They have no shaychas to eat. Okay, so should we say that he's being mevatel issur? Okay, should we say that he's doing it for all of his customers? So if he's doing it for all of his customers, for each of his customers, he's doing it for each of his customers. Well, I'm one of the customers, so then it would be also for me to eat it. That food would become treif. Or she'd say would most assume the opposite, that he's doing it for the majority of his customers. Okay, his kavanah is for who his general customers are. So if he's making cookies for the whole United States, the United States is 1% of the people keep kosher, whatever it is. So then the bulk people are not. So he's not doing it for Yidden. As opposed to the other way of looking at it would say is he's doing it for all of his customers. All of his customers includes me. If I'm one of the customers, then it would be also for me to use that food. It would be considered a knas of imvat l'sachil. Okay, we assume, like I said, the first way that he's doing it for whoever his majority of people are, and therefore there's no knas on that food. We don't say it was bitul issur. Okay, now, but related to that is Moshe, which I think the true you're talking about, maybe says. He says is if there's something that we're not allowed to do l'chatchila, if there's something not allowed to do l'chatchila, so Ramosha says is that we can't give hashgachah to a company who's doing that same thing, even though the goyim they don't have to do that. What he's talking about is something that's aino ben yomo. So I'm not to use a kli that's aino ben yomo, but the guy doesn't have that issur d'rabbanan to use a kli that's aino ben yomo. He says, but if I give hashgachah to what he's doing, he says it's machmir. He says that it's inappropriate. Inappropriate for a hashgachah. If I'm certifying what he's doing, it's as if I'm telling you, yes, you're allowed to do this, but I couldn't do this in my house. So for me to say that you could do it, the non-Jewish person who's doing this thing in his factory, it's not appropriate that the hashgachah should be giving a stamp of approval. So that means to say is that if he did it, it would be mutter. But I can't give hashgachah to him for him doing that thing. Okay, and the hashgachas have sort of adopted this idea. And we do it for our din. Morosh not talking about bitul issur. He's talking about aino ben yomo, but we do it for bitul issur. We won't give hashgachah to someone who is mevatel something lechatchila. Now that means is what I said to you in number 10, that if he is something and the manufacturer makes something where which includes bitul issur, doesn't make it usher. So that ingredient came to a company with hashgachah, we could use it. It comes to my house, I could use it. But I wouldn't give hashgachah to that guy who's doing the bitul issur himself. Okay? Now, this had an interesting... I'm not to that one yet. Okay. So, this idea that we won't give hashgachah to someone's bitul issur, we spoke about way back when. That's what the thing in brackets there is. We just spoke. I'll tell you briefly. Is Rebelsky has this shita about if time transfers into steam and then back a bunch of times, it gets mutter at a certain point. After it transfers enough time from the food into the steam, and there's a whole to do about if it transfers enough times, it becomes mutter. Excuse me. Rebelsky said, even though it's true, even though he held like that, he said, but it had to be that it was bottled before it got to the kosher food. We couldn't use. It can't be that the last transfer is into the kosher food. It'd have to be kosher before it got to the kosher food, because he held that was also a type of a bitul issur. Okay, to make the last the last bitul happen into our food, that he wouldn't let. Okay. Number 12. Okay, if a person has two different choices. Okay, one is a food that has no issur in it, zero issur in it at all, and one that has a tiny amount of issur into it, and the issur that's in there is bottle. Okay, the amount that's in there is not significant. So Taz says that choosing the one that had the bitul in it is a form of bitul issur. It's not really bitul issur because I didn't do it. I'm just standing in the store and there's two packages in front of me. So the fact that I chose this one instead of that one, that's a form of bitul issur. I'm choosing to do this when I could have had that one, as if I want the issur. Why am I choosing this one over that one? It's as if I want the Isser. So when they're two completely equal items, okay, this one has a little Isser in it, and this one has no Isser in it. Why did I choose this one? That sort of gives a feel that I want Isser. So it's a shadow of a related to a Bitul Issur l'chatchila. Okay, so but that which is true. That's what Taz says. But of course it means only in cases when the two choices are equal, when they're completely equal. If one of them is cheaper or shinier or tastes better or whatever, then you don't have that. It doesn't mean anything. The fact that I chose this one is not because I want Isser. It's because it costs $1 less, or because some other reason why it's tastier. That's why I chose it. So, but only when they're exactly equal, then we say well, why do you choose this one? The only difference between them is that this one has Isser in it. Oh, it must be you want Isser. The Taz says that's a type of a Bitul Issur. Okay, and last in this section is what happens if we have two people? Let's say you only eat pas Yisrael and I eat pas palter. Okay, let's say we have such a situation. So are you allowed to be mevatel pas palter for me? Okay, you want to make there's a thing called kvass. Okay, it's a beverage made from bread, a fermented beverage made with bread. Okay, so the question is, can you make kvass for me that'll have pas palter in it? Now, for me, pas palter is mutter. For you, pas palter is usher. You don't eat pas palter. Okay, you only eat pas Yisrael. So for you would not be allowed to make it for yourself. To make for yourself, you for sure can. But you're not making it for you. You're making it for me, and I hold that I'm allowed to eat it. Okay. So it's a good question, and it might depend on how you hold your Isser. Do you not eat, in this case, my example, pas palter? Do you not eat it because you think, din it's usher, you're not allowed to eat pas palter? Or you think, no, it's just a chumrah, I'm being extra machmir about myself, and maybe if I'm just being machmir, that's my hold that it's mutar, I'm just being machmir, so then I might be allowed to do that. There might depend on that, okay? Which I'm not sure the real answer to that question. Okay, and our last group here, okay, and that is the group of ein kavonoso levatel. Okay, so the Isser of Bitul Issur is really, it's called ayin mevatel l'chatchila. You're not allowed to purposely be mevatel something. So that means if it applies when that's my intention is to be mevatel. I'm trying to get the Isser into the heter. What happens if I have some other thing in mind? I'm putting it in here not because I want to get the Isser into the heter. Okay, I have some other reason. So we call it ayin kavonoso levatel. I'm not trying to be mevatel into here. Then the Isser doesn't apply. So for example, let's say someone's making a food and they use an antifoam. Okay, so they're not putting an antifoam because they want antifoam in their food. It has no shaykhah. They don't want that in their food at all. It's just that in the cooking part of it, it's too bubbly. So you put in this antifoam that gets rid of the bubbles, and that makes it a better, makes it easier to cook. It has nothing to do with. I'm not trying to get into my food. Okay, so that's okay. What happens if you have? I'm not saying it's okay. I'm saying that's an example. Another example is what happens if you puree broccoli to make kugel, or raspberries to make jelly, or strawberries to make smoothies. Okay, so in all those cases, you're being mevatel and Isser because there's potentially bugs in these things. And but the reason why I'm doing that is because that's how you make a smoothie. You grind up the food. I'm not grinding up the food because I'm trying to get rid of the Isser. That's not what. I thought with these two phones. It's not such a machar over here, you know. So it's a. Yes, no, I know. Okay, so it's not because I'm trying to make that. It's because the way you make kugel is you have to grind up the broccoli first. Okay, so I'm not trying to do the thing that I'm not supposed to. I'm not allowed to grind up the barrier in order to make it be bottle. But that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to make kugel, okay, or I'm trying to make jelly. Okay, so there's a bunch of factors that play into here. Okay, I have 4 here to tell you. One is, does it make a difference if you add the Isser, like in the case of antifoam, you added the Isser into the food, as opposed to the kugel case where the Isser is already in there. If the bugs are in there, then I didn't add them in there. Does that make a difference? Second is, does it make a difference if it's vadai Isser or safek Isser? Okay, in all the cases that I told you, in most of those cases, it's only safek Isser. Okay, unless it would be terribly infested, it would be only safek Isser. Okay, next, do I have to do something to show this connected to the Taz I told you a second ago? Do I have to do something to show that I don't want the Isser? So, like for example, would I have to wash off the broccoli before I put it in to show I'm doing something minimal to get rid of this. I don't want the Issur over here. Okay, and last is, what about is there an alternative? Is there something else that I could have? Meaning, if I have an anti-foam, I could buy the kosher one or the one that has no Hashgachah on it. So I could just go use the kosher one, and that again has relative to this taz of maybe by choosing it, I'm showing that I don't want Issur. So there's a lot. We had a lot of talk about this way back in Pedal. Okay, now this brings up there was an interesting case that happened almost 25 years ago. Okay, and what it is like this. I have to just give you a drop of background to explain you the story, and that is like this: when you make cheese, you take milk and you add rennet into it, and it separates into curd and whey. Curd is the cheese part, and whey is the not cheese part. Okay, if you make it, in most cases, even if the cheese is treif, even if the cheese is gvinas akum, the whey remains kosher. Okay, not for today's discussion. The whey that's left over stays kosher. Okay, in most cases, the whey stays kosher. Fine. Now, when you make mozzarella cheese, after you finish the cheese, you take it out of it, separate it from the whey. You then cook the mozzarella cheese, and that helps make it extra stringy, and that's good for it. When you cook it, the water that you cook it in absorbs lots of parts of the cheese. Think about it. You cook cheese in water, stuff is going to leach into the water. Okay, so companies don't want to throw out that water, because they have to pay for the drainage. You have to pay extra putting that in the drain, and also because it has valuable cheese in it. Okay? So what they did, they want that water. Okay, so it was a whole ASIC like 25 years ago. What to do? Should they let companies keep that water or not keep that water? So for a short time, the Hashgachahs came up with this idea. They said they'll take that water and they'll add that cooked water. Now the cooked water is treif. They cook treif cheese in that water. Add that cooked water into the milk that they're going to make cheese with. You say, oh my gosh, why would you let them put... So listen to the thinking. This is why they let them put it into the milk. They said, put it into the milk because that milk is going to turn into cheese. When you make cheese, the part that's in the water, the valuable part that's in the water is the fat. So what's going to happen is when you put it into the milk, the fat part is going to go into the cheese. Okay, that milk is going to become cheese. The fat that you just got out of there is going to go into the cheese. The fat's going to go into the cheese. The cheese is going to be treif. The whey is going to be kosher. Now, some fat might get into the whey also. Some fat might get into the whey. But in whey, you don't want to have fat. Because in whey, you're going to have to spray dry it. It's not good to have fat in it. So it's kavonoso levatel. The little bit of whey that's going to get in there, so it's going to be a tiny bit, the little bit of fat is going to be kavonoso levatel. So you could let them put it into the milk. Because the milk, most of the treif is going to end up in the cheese part, which is treif. The little bit of treif that gets into the whey part is going to be kavonoso levatel, and everything was wonderful. Okay, this was a very short-lived heter that they let companies do this. It was a big to-do. What should they do with the companies about this? And they said, we're going to let them put it into the milk that's heading to cheese. That was an idea. That lasted until, first of all, some people were upset about it. Okay, that's one thing. but also is that they realized that there are actually some companies that want fat in their whey, particularly people who make ricotta cheese. Okay, ricotta cheese is a cheese made out of whey. It's a type of cheese made out of whey. So they said, okay, no. So they said, we're never going to figure out who really wants it and who doesn't want it. We're trying to creep into the minds of the guys making cheese. Do you want fat in your whey? You don't want it. So they dropped it. Okay, anyhow, that was a story that happened like 25 years ago. Okay, it doesn't exist anymore. Or actually, it doesn't exist in Repu Hashgachah, should I say anymore, as far as I know. Okay, next. Okay, another example of kavonoso levatel. I'm not trying to be itul. Is something that's called hamichabdim, and that is like this. If you have a kli that was used for treif, excuse me, then you need to clean it out. Let's even forget about that there was heat. Just if there was Issur in a kli, you have to clean it out before you use it for kosher. Okay, so the din is, much to most people's surprise, it comes from a Mishnah, that you only have to clean it out to what we call the industrial standard of clean. Okay, there might be tiny bits of Issur left behind. The din is you're not mechuyev to get those out, and the reason is because the Rashi explains it's because of kavonoso levatel. The little bit that's left behind, the reason it's going to be batel b'shishim into when you put the kosher food in afterwards. It's going to be batel. Why aren't you getting rid of it? It's not because you want it in your food. It's because it's just such a schlep to get rid of it. It's such a pachka to take it out. So you're not bothering to take it out. Okay, but etzem, you don't want that. You don't want that in your food, and therefore it's it will be bottle. I'm not trying to get it into there. It's happening. I'm not trying to do that. And so back over there in Taf Nanav, when we spoke about it, we spoke about what qualifies. But that touches the rule, and it's an example of ein kavonoso levatel. Okay. Next. Next time, we're going to talk about something called asal l'shtamish b'shefah, and that means is that if you have a kli, that the amount of issa that's in there will always be batal b'shishim, basically always be batal b'shishim into the next food that you're going to cook into it. Then many hold there's no chiyuv to kash that kli at all. Okay, and if I know that this kli is treif, this cup is treif, but the amount of issa in there will basically always be batal b'shishim into the food that I put into here. Many hold I don't have. Meaning, including like the Shulchan Aruch, I do not have to kasha the cup before I use it for kasha. Okay. Now that's also l'shtamish shefah. Now what happens if it will not be batal b'shishim? Okay, I just told you that it's mutter if it will be batal. What happens if it won't be batal? So the answer is no. So then I have to kasha the kli because it's not going to be batal. So Pri Megadim is kasha like this. He says, okay, let's say half the time it's going to be batal and half the time it's not going to be batal. So then you say you have to kasher because sometimes it will be batal, sometimes it's not. It doesn't fit into this heter of asal l'shtamish b'shefah. He says, okay, so what happens in the situation when it will be batal? Right now I'm going to use the cup in a way that it will be batal. He says the amount of issa that's in there is going to be batal, means it's not going to be nice and tam. If it's not going to be nice and tam, then it's ein kavonoso levatel. I obviously don't want that issa to be in my food because it doesn't do anything for my food. It's built in there. When it's going to be batal b'shishim, it's ein kavonoso levatel. I don't want the blios from my cup to be in my food because it's so little that it won't be tasted even. So you can't say that I want it. The fact that it's coming in is sort of just I'm stuck with it. I'm not choosing to put it in there because I can't possibly want it in there because if I would want it in there, because it doesn't give any time anyhow. So what's the problem? Let's say it's not asal l'shtamish b'shefah. It should still be mutter in cases when it's batal because of this rule ein kavonoso levatel. Okay, that's a thoughtful question from Pri Megadim. He says, Pri Megadim himself says that the reason why it's asur is because of the Taz. I told you the Taz says if you have a choice to have the heter, to have the issa mixed in or not have the issa mixed in, by choosing to have the issa mixed in, that in itself is a Bitul Issur. Why didn't I kasha the kli? Why didn't I use a different cup? It must be that I want the issa into there. I really don't, but it looks like that because I didn't choose to do this. He says, Shulchan has a different answer. He says the other answer is based on it's exerit rabbanan. And the Chacham said you're not allowed to use a kli that's aino ben yomo. They were saying even though it won't make your food asur, still we don't want you to use it. We're afraid you're going to make a mistake. So we're afraid, just like aino ben yomo, we're afraid you're going to use it when it's ben yomo. If it's batal b'shishim, we're afraid you're going to use it when it's not batal b'shishim. Okay, but it's the question is an interesting, deeper question. Okay. Our last case is that sometimes you have a factory where in one side of the factory they're making milchigs, and one side they're making parav, or one side they're making pesadik, and one side they're making chametzik. And there's airborne particles that go from one side to the other. Okay, there's no issa moving from one side, nothing at all. The things are completely separate, but there's still stuff floating around in the air that can get into there. That's why you might see an allergen statement that says, "Don't this food may contain traces of that thing." No one's putting it in, but who knows? Something's flowing around the air. So Rav Shachta thought that we should not give Hashgachah when that potential exists. He thought it was an example of Bitul Issur. Seemingly to us, it sounds like ein kavonoso levatel, right? Nobody's trying to get it into there; it's just floating in the air. Right? It sounds like a great example of someone ein kavonoso levatel. No one's trying to get it in there at all; it just happened to have floated in there. But he thought that for Hashgachah wise, he saw people wanted more from Hashgachah. They expected us to do better standard. I don't know that people actually follow that directive that he gave, but that was his shita. That's a form of Bitul Issur for people to do that. Okay, I am done. Now I have to figure out how to turn this off. It's easier said than